As Greg says, my name is Sue Jones. I'm the Director of Two-Year Mission Integration at the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education. Now, if that doesn't have a long tagline and a signature, many of you I know this, but I have worked in the past as in the Outreach Division at University of Montana Western, and also was a reference librarian at one time in my life. I also worked in the educational travel industry for about 10 years as an interim thing, which was a lot of fun. But today we're going to talk about course sharing. And before we get started, though, I would like to have each panel member introduce who they are and what they do so you can get acquainted with them. Brad?
Well, good morning. My name is Brad Eldridge. I'm the Vice President for Instruction and Student Services at Flathead Valley Community College down the road in Kalispell.
Good morning, I'm Katie Brook, and I am the project coordinator for the RevUp Montana project, which is one of those TAC-funded grants.
Good morning, Vern Gagnon, faculty member at City College at MSU Billings. Also, at one point in my life, taught here at MSU-Northern. Have also served a role as a department chair within the transportation and related areas at Billings, as well as currently being the principal investigator for the RevUp Montana project that's at MSU Billings.
I'm Larry Strizich. I'm the interim dean for the College of Technical Sciences here at MSU-Northern. Prior to that, I was a faculty member since about 1988, since exactly 1988, if you want to. Anyway, and chair for about the last 15 years in the College of Technical Sciences.
Bob Anderson, I'm the Director of Industry Initiatives at Northern, and which includes being the Director of the TAC3 RevUp grant.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to start out with a little bit with just talking about course sharing. The growth of online courses and programs really is what started a lot of the interest in course sharing. It has really led to numerous opportunities in course sharing. Essentially what it is sharing virtual seat space in one course. The overall goal with course sharing has been to provide access to courses where no access, or at least timely access, existed in a student's plan of study. The delivery can vary a lot. As you know, we've already heard a little bit about what some of the folks are doing, and we'll hear more. But it can be via conferencing software, online courses, or it could be a blended and a hybrid course. There are a lot of models. There are student-centered models where there is a lot more support readily available for students, such as making sure financial is available for that student taking this course in a different mode. Other models are more focused on, even though the colleges are working closely together, but the onus is really on the student to make sure that he or she is taking care of everything on their own, such as the financial aid. Typically, there's an enrolling institution and there's a provider institution in course sharing. There are a lot of variations on how to configure this, but it's important to have a really clear understanding of who keeps in contact with the student and who works closely with the faculty member. Course sharing is already occurring in a lot of states. To name a few, the University of Missouri system, the system is doing it. The University System of Maryland, New Mexico does it via a consortium of campuses called SUN, S-U-N, and it occurs in Nevada, and I'm sure many other locations. Actually, Montana has done some graduate level course sharing as well as what we'll be hearing about, some 500 level graduate courses. Often those type of courses, I believe the ones that I saw on the books, are actually retired right now because they're very cyclical and offered when needed, not on a constant basis necessarily. That's done through WICHE, the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, and they call their program WICHE ICE, ICE standing for Internet Course Exchange. There are other examples where it's offered in systems, in other words, outside in a regional configuration. There's CIC, Committee on Institutional Cooperation, that includes Iowa, Maryland, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Illinois. And then there's a program called Nexus, which is a nationwide exchange of nursing programs, so it's on a nationwide basis there. And finally, a lot of non-credit training is done in a sharing manner, such as course sharing. Only it happens to be perhaps non-credit training. A lot of companies, especially if they have satellite offices throughout the U.S., rather than having training and going out to each site, they do it via the internet with one parent campus offering the training and the others benefiting. I personally am no expert in course sharing, but I'm learning more about the possible opportunities and structure as our 2-year leadership meetings have been exploring and discussing possibilities with course sharing. Again, I mentioned the platform, Witchy Ice. That is one that we are now exploring. We're looking at it as a possibility to at least pilot some internet course exchange. Through ICE, again, the consortium provides students increased access to online courses. So the programs are offered by this teaching institution, and again, the students are able to remain at their home enrolling institution. The Witchy ICE platform is very, very focused on students. It's very student-centered. This makes financial aid, registration, and course transfer seamless for the students. I'm going to pause now and turn it over to our panel experts. First, we're going to hear from Brad Eldridge, who will give an overview of the TAC3 course sharing, program sharing model at Flathead Valley Community College. Brad?
All right, thanks, Sue. So I'll just give you a little history of how we got to where we're at today. And I think where we're at today is just right on the verge of starting to do some course sharing around the TAC3 RevUp grant. So FVCC actually received a TAC grant just for FVCC in the second round, TAC2. And we used that grant to develop a really quality machining program at our college. Really solid curriculum based on input from our industry partners in our valley. When TAC3 was submitted, part of that grant asked us to put that curriculum online and then share it across the state so that students in remote locations in Montana could have access to machining, mostly machining. There's some electrical too, but advanced manufacturing curriculum. So how that was designed to work was that we would put our lecture portions of our machining and advanced manufacturing courses online. And then the hands-on component, because obviously you can't learn to be a machinist or an electrical technician fully online. The hands-on component of that would then be done at centers that were called assessment centers at various locations around the state. So someone who was in Glasgow could maybe drive, well, that might not be the best example. Glasgow's a long ways from everywhere. But they could come to Havre, for example, and do the hands-on component here after, in conjunction with doing the lecture, the theory online through FVCC's instructors. So that sounds really great in theory, and it's a noble endeavor, and it's really hard to do when you get down into the details. So that's what we've been struggling with for the past, I don't know how long we've been struggling, 2 years. 2 years. It's been fun. Katie and I have got to know each other pretty well. So there's challenges to that, and I'm sure as we talk about this with our panel that we can talk about those challenges in more detail. But you know, some of the challenges are how the money flows, who gets tuition, who gets FTE, and the way we've set it up in the TAC grant is that FECC, which is called the teaching college for these online courses, gets a flat fee based on a tuition amount at the lowest tuition rate of the consortium, and then the enrolling college, which is the college, the student's sort of home college where they're regularly enrolled, they get to count the FTE. Also, there needs to be agreement on how the two instructors will collaborate with each other and how that will work around issues like FERPA, and how that relationship will work between the two schools. The idea is that the enrolling colleges, which is the home-based college for the student, would put the curriculum on their books through their curriculum committee and their process, and then essentially they would be subcontracting the lecture portion of that program to FECC, is how I like to think about it. So that's the overview of the model, and then I'll turn it over to the others, and then we can discuss some of the things we've learned along the way.
Thank you, Brad. I'm going to just open it up with some questions I'm going to ask the panel, and let the panel decide who wants to answer. First of all, just the simple question, why do we want to move forward with course sharing? What is the motivation behind this discussion?
I'm going to go first. So for me, I think obviously when judging from the panel previously, I think that this is something on all of our minds, but it's about the students. Like, this is to serve students, and there are a ton of challenges, and it is definitely, I don't want to minimize the amount of time and effort that's going to go into putting something like this together, but just to think of, I like to even boil it all the way back to these individual students, like one student who lives somewhere and is homebound and isn't going to be able to get to a campus and wants to take care of his family and doesn't know how he's going to be able to attend college. That's really exciting for me. I think there's just, it's always good to never forget that the point of this always comes back to providing access to training that students wouldn't otherwise have. And I think if we can keep that as our central focus, then some of these other challenges will be, if not easy, definitely surmountable.
Thanks, Katie. I think from my perspective, and probably the perspective of our TAC3 funding, one of the goals of the project is to embed course sharing in a lot of our programs. So obviously that's a motivation for us. Beyond that, I think having the ability to provide programs and coursework at other institutions who may not have the resources to provide the entire program is going to be of a benefit to all. Right now, under the project, and Brad alluded to this, Flathead Valley is primarily the lead institution on the course sharing we're mostly looking at, in that Flathead Valley has the program. We're going to share it among other institutions and offer coursework really collaboratively. The ideal, bigger picture, longer term, would for this to be more reciprocal among all of our units, so that programs at every institution could be shared when appropriate, and we could really cross the state with expertise and program array that we otherwise maybe couldn't offer. So I think opening this up beyond a couple of programs would be a long-term goal, and probably a huge benefit for really all the students in Montana and really other institutions who don't have the resources to offer an entire program.
Yeah, coupling on to that, the reason Northern's interested in doing it is actually twofold. One, we do have the need for some of that specialized training from Flathead Valley Community College. We have programs that we're still dealing with that have the requirement for some CAD/CAM things. We don't have the critical mass necessary to maintain that as a program, but now we do have a number of people who are interested in, for example, the CAD/CAM, the CNC machinery operation. It is a wonderful thing for us to be able to offer that coursework to those folks that need that. In fact, I like to push the envelope a little bit, so I've been leading on Brad a little bit that in spring semester here coming up, I have at least one student and perhaps 5 that want to take 2 of their courses from Flathead Valley. We have the capability of providing the laboratory experience here. That's one of the challenges, of course, is that was alluded to, that cooperation between their instructor and our instructor, but I think we need to get into it to see how that can work out. I don't know if many of you have ever developed a laboratory course before, but it does require that you specify the kinds of things, the actions that people need to learn in that lab course. We usually refer to them as lab sheets or learning outcomes or whatever, but that has to be developed to support the lecture portion, because otherwise it might as well be two separate courses. So that's important. The second thing that Northern is interested in is, as you've heard indicated, we're trying to raise the number of students in our diesel program, not because we just want to have lots and lots of folks in diesel, but we work with industry and they want our graduates. They want as many as we can turn out. Now, we have a little dip in the economy right now that has affected that, but they're still coming to campus. They're still looking for graduates, people that are trained. One of the ways that we feel that we can increase the number of students that graduate from our 2-year and 4-year degree is to be able to cooperate with colleges. In fact, we're trying again this spring to go the other direction, and that is to offer some of our basic electrical and diesel courses out to, right now we're working with Fort Peck Community College to attempt to offer that. Now that requires that at their end they hire somebody who can operate the lab. We will provide the lab sheets, the goals for that laboratory experience, and that person would not necessarily be as well-trained or highly qualified as the people that teach that stuff here. We have those folks. So they can go, and again, we're using that hybrid model with ITV, the Polycom system, but we can deliver that coursework to Fort Peck. Those students can sit through the lecture along with all the rest of our students in that course and then have the lab experience. And quite honestly, it takes somebody just with the knowledge of running the equipment, of being able to supervise that lab so that everything is safe and the student accomplishes their learning objectives. That is a lower standard than the guy necessary to create that course and to teach it all the way around. And so hopefully then that will end up with a student possibly with a certificate, possibly with an associate degree, and then transfer into Northern's 4-year degree program. That is the goal.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to, the kind of one thing that I had on my list was that if we look beyond that, the piece that we're looking at right now is, we've talked about it, and it's been brought up here, as exploratory. For a student to actually try something, is this the right area, a right program for me?
And then just a couple other thoughts. So I know if I put my OCHI hat on or my Regents hat on, and I can do that because I worked for OCHI for a couple of years a long time ago, so I know how you people think. But we love you. So I know there's been concern in the past about competition among institutions and duplication of effort across the state, that if you have a program, at Billings, why do you need one at Havre? Why do you need a similar one in Kalispell? And, our argument has always been, well, we have so many place-bound students that they can't pull up routes and move to Havre or move to Billings to take a program, so we need that duplication. If we could implement course sharing as a state, that would kind of solve that problem, where one of our students, for example, if there was a program in Havre or Billings or wherever that was offered via distance, and we could still have them as our student and provide the financial aid and provide the student services and the advising and all that in cooperation. From a state perspective, that would be very efficient use of higher ed resources. It would also, course sharing, allow us, I think, as a state to run some programs at one institution that wouldn't be viable at any individual institution because the enrollment just wouldn't be there. So I think there's some efficiency arguments for course sharing as well.
So we're hearing that it's a good thing for students, obviously. It gives us an opportunity to offer unique programs, specialized training. I can see and hear about resources. It's a way to save money and be more efficient, and that we can respond to industry demands from people like we had discussions with yesterday, and also have an opportunity for some exploratory things for students. So with all that in mind, why can you tell any of you tell me why you think course sharing is not happening right now to a large degree in the state of Montana?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons, and like I said, I don't ever want to minimize the process things, but since I'm not at an administration level, I have the fortune of being able to look at things from kind of more of a ground and excitement level, and then let you guys work out all the details. So, I think there are a lot of challenges. I think obviously, when we've talked about this a lot, there are some issues with the competitive nature of our institutions, and I think that there is still some maybe confusion around how course sharing is going to affect, FTE and performance-based funding, and hopefully if we can answer some of those questions for you today or soon, that we'll be able to maybe alleviate some of those things. But I think that that's been a part of it, is just maybe a little bit of fear of what that would look like and how that's going to take away from individual campuses. The other thing I would say is that the approval process to get this into place, as we have seen, has been super cumbersome and lengthy, and I think a lot of schools have just washed their hands of it just because of that, not wanting to have to. None of the schools in this room, I'm talking about on the other side, have had some feeling like it would just be easier if they didn't play. So.
Thanks, Katie. I think I would agree with those comments. Additionally, I think one of the challenges, and Professor Boyson alluded to it earlier, the continuity between faculty members at different locations becomes a challenge for delivery of content and the same experience for students at different locations, which I think has created some hesitancy on, one, the institution's part, but specifically on the faculty members' part to put their content out there, not knowing the qualifications and the ability of other folks to deliver really the student outcomes in the same way that they would deliver them if they are at their home campus. So I think there's some of that fear factor, not necessarily associated with a competition as much as it is the credibility of that course and the credibility of the degree once it's conferred. However, I think within our system, a couple of steps have taken place to help alleviate some of those fears. The common course numbering process that Mary Mo mentioned yesterday, I think allowed some joint faculty collaboration, which started to build the rapport that's necessary for folks to have the trust and the encouragement in their peers across the state to really take the next leap into course sharing. So it's I think, a step in the right direction, and we will get there. It's just going to take some time to get everybody comfortable, because anytime we go through a change, it has some uncomfortable feeling. So I think the fear factor is partly to blame for some of the hesitancy and the resistance maybe to really using course sharing to its full potential.
I think as well that what we're trying to do through the TAC grant is actually probably the hardest, the most difficult course sharing that you could do. And I don't know why we started with that, but that's what we did. I think if you were just talking about fully online courses, that this could go fairly smoothly. With what we're trying to do with the TAC grant, we're talking about splitting a course into a lecture portion and a lab portion, and having the lab portion taught at one school and the lecture portion taught at another school, which requires faculty, two different faculty members from two different institutions to collaborate, which is difficult. There's fear about accreditation, that if institutions put these courses, put FEC's courses on their books as if they're their courses, which is what they're doing through the program approval process, then how do they assure that the FECC faculty are delivering, like you said, the learning outcomes that we're saying we're delivering when they don't supervise the FECC faculty? So there's some trust stuff going on. And then there's just like this devil in the details stuff that we just get bogged down in. Like, for example, FERPA. We decided that the best way to get this all through the approval process was to split the courses into 2 courses. So we have a lecture course and a lab course. But then how do faculty at 2 different institutions share information about how students are doing in 2 different courses and not violate FERPA? So the registrars then get involved. There's things like our academic calendars are all different. So if we start teaching a course at the beginning of our academic calendar, but then Billings academic calendar starts, 2 or 3 weeks later, but then this is theoretically a Billings course because it's on Billings books. Can Billings start the course, early? So there's all this like minutia, this bureaucratic process stuff that just bogs us down. So I think that's just part of the challenge, is just being persistent, working through all that stuff.
And yeah, the challenge for that approval process, I was going to bring the paperwork that I've generated to get approved, the 2 programs that we're going to share with Flathead, but I didn't want to carry a ream of paper around with me all day. It is significant, and of course part of that is our approval process. Part of that is that we have to run it through our campus, then we run it through Bozeman, and then it goes to the Board of Regents. I think there can be some things done there. I haven't heard that anything is going to be, but there can be some things done to recognize that this is a program at that campus, and that all we are doing is sharing the coursework and potentially the program that way. The other part of that is we're doing it a little different, like Brad said, doing the lecture and lab part. I find it interesting that Monday I was at the 2-year council meeting, and in that group, they pretty much all said, oh no, we're all doing course sharing. We don't need this other stuff. We don't need witchy ice. We don't need to do that. Okay, their definition was their articulations were working, and that was their course sharing. However, remember, every time a student wants to take a course from another campus, like mine, to take it from Flathead Valley, they have to apply for admission at that school. They have to be admitted. Then they have to enroll. Then they have to figure out that financial aid thingy. And I'm an engineer, and I can't figure that out. So I'm pretty sure our students would look upon that as a tremendous challenge. And our students, when they run into challenges, are going to, it's like electrons. They take the path of least resistance, and that may be, I won't do that. And that's not the best thing for them. I think we need to provide that. We need to make it easy. And if we need to short circuit some things to get this all to work, I'm all in favor of that. Witchy ice appears to be a very good solution because that handles the financial aid, the dollars portion, the enrollment, the transfer of grades. I kind of like all of that. Of course, that is right now what I've heard is a sales pitch, and I always look upon that with about a 5-pound bag of salt. So we'll see how that all works out. But I do think it's important for us to do it. In Montana, and as we've recognized, we're spread too thin as a university system to provide that kind of service to the state of Montana. We have to be able to do that. And making it easier, in my mind, is probably a good idea.
I'll sit next to you.
Sure, Bob.
Okay. Why we started with course sharing and TAC3, and Brad's right about being the difficult one to start with, and you're trying to combine lectures and labs, and how we break that up. But as we move forward with it, there really needs to be the discussion of what do we want to share, what are we willing to share, what do we need.
Can any of you outline any specific benefits or efficiencies we could achieve with course sharing?
I was trying to give somebody a chance to go, but, and we've talked about these a little bit, I think, already, but from a system side versus from the student side, I also think there's an opportunity to have some resiliency in programs, because if you're sharing programs across the whole system, there's this opportunity to kind of grow and shrink in certain areas without having the whole program or the whole system affected. So there's definitely some benefits there. As Brad said, campuses that maybe can't afford to run a program with 2 students, they could still send those 2 students into this shared course, and those students would still be served. So I think that there are a lot of benefits to it from both the student side and the system side.
I think another potential significant benefit is to really share faculty expertise between institutions. I'd love our students at MSU Billings to be able to take one of Professor Boyson's diesel courses and have that same level of expertise that they deliver at their baccalaureate level. So I think that there's some significant advantages to the student in gaining the right skills and knowledge from high-level faculty members that they may not be able to have in a different setting. So I think that student experience is going to be really enlightened quite a bit if we can find the best of the best and put those in front of the students, especially the most needy students, the ones that really need that good instruction.
And I don't think we should discount the idea of just having exposure to multiple voices on a subject. Sure, we've got several people on this campus that are experts in diesel technology, but to a large extent, and part of it's the Pro from Dover effect, I don't know if you all remember MASH, doesn't matter that the person has no better qualifications or anything else, but he's from another place. When he comes in, that person is now the expert. That's another good thing to be exposed to, because you get a different voice, a different perspective, and a different experience from that person's background that then can contribute to our classwork. And it'd be really cool to have, 30 or 40 diesel instructors here on campus, all with all of those different backgrounds, but we can't quite sustain that. Greg's working on it, but we're not there yet.
I'm also thinking of the previous panel and the discussion about debt. If a student is in whether it's their second year in a 2-year program or their 3rd or 4th year in a 4-year program and can't get the course they need, what happens? They have to stick around longer and stay in school somehow so they can get that course when it does come up, resulting in more debt probably. Especially our adult students too. We know our 2-year schools have a large proportion of adult students, and I know some of our 4-year campuses do too. They don't have time to sit and wait for that course to come around. They have to graduate and get onto a job. A lot of them have families, so I think that's something else to think about. Let's turn it now to faculty. I know we talked a little bit about what the faculty do and how they can share, but what other considerations do we need to make in regard to faculty who participate in teaching shared courses?
Well, yeah, so in the particular example we're talking about in TAC3, which is a little bit unique because you have 2 faculty involved, as I've already mentioned, I think the imperative is that those 2 faculty who are teaching the same student have some kind of a mechanism or a process in place between the 2 of them where they're really team teaching that course. And so that's critical because, how the student is doing in the lecture affects how they're going to do in the lab and vice versa. And those faculty are not going to be able to serve that student well if they're teaching that course in 2 silos. So from a faculty perspective, I think the collaboration is really important. And then kind of like what Mary Mo talked about yesterday with the flocks that happened, that faculty love to get together and talk about their craft. And so if course sharing could be an impetus to have that happen again regularly, I think that would be very welcome by the faculty.
I would just tag on to Brad's comment and maybe throw a little bit of a snag in that. And oftentimes the intent for course sharing is to deliver a program that you may not already have in another institution. And in doing that, it really means you don't have a faculty member at that institution who's going to take the lead on it. So oftentimes we're looking at taking a faculty member in a similar discipline and having them be a faculty mentor, and oftentimes looking at adjunct or part-time instructors who come from that field of study who don't have the same preparation in education and in teaching. So we have to have that collaborative work between institutions that we can build trust that we're going to support our part-time faculty members really on the other side of the delivery. So I think from the faculty perspective, one of the challenges with course sharing is it does put additional load on the faculty members at the teaching institution in order to really be a mentor and bring that coursework together in both, especially with a lecture lab component where you really have that distance delivery of content, specifically the tactile hand-on content that you're not physically there for. So you have to trust somebody else to deliver that. So I think that there is a hurdle, and comes back to that fear factor, but also it's the realistic challenge of the logistics of making it happen.
Mine. I worked with Wayne Boyson rather extensively at the beginning of TAC3 in how do we had the system going from Wayne to the campus, and then as TAC came around, how are we going to deliver it from the campus out? And came up with the challenges that came up with that. But one of the things we came up with faculty was virtual office hours. We have a new group of students that need tutoring. They need that questions answered, and so how do we make that time available and resources available because they are at a different location? Wayne's used his phone rather effectively, and then we also set up another studio, Polycom studio, to where students could come in and talk to Wayne, and he could set his hours.
Just want to, oh, okay. Real quick, I'll be quick. I'm sorry. I was totally stepping on your toes. Sorry. Just one more thing that just came to my mind. So if we're talking about taking a face-to-face program and putting it online, I can't even tell you the amount of hours that our faculty spent putting all that machining content online, and what a tremendous effort that was. And we had to hire an instructional designer to help them. And if it hadn't been for the grant money, we never would have made it pencil out. So that's another thing we need to think about if we're talking about a face-to-face program, moving it online to share it to the state. It's a tremendous amount of resources to do that.
Yeah, I was just going to actually tag on to both Vern and Brad, but yeah, the whole faculty person, the person that delivers it, when you look at porting something to another method of delivery, it's one of the things that Wayne did very, very well, and I would say that's a unique capability to be able to get in front of the camera and engage people and keep them engaged and interact, which is a whole new thing. I mean, we're all used to watching TV, but some of us are used to sitting in front of a group, but to be able to sit in front of a TV, watching the TV, to respond to the body cues that your audience is giving you, that's pretty unique. And I would say that Wayne does that very effectively. Coming from the other end of that spectrum, when we talk about this lab portion, I have firsthand experience there because as chair, I had half-time teaching experience, and I happen to be one of Wayne's lab facilitators. We had another term, but we can't use that in polite company. But Wayne would teach the lecture portion, and then I would have two of his lab sections for the exact same course. Now, my background is in electronics, and it was an electrical course, Electrical 2 for the diesel program. And so I pretty much know my way around electrons and measurement and all of that. However, I've never worked in an automobile or diesel shop. I've never worked around that equipment to any great extent. I did work on my own cars, but nowhere near like that. Wayne is the guy with, I mean, I'm envious and awed by his encyclopedic memory for specific vehicles. I could call him up with a truck that I had never seen before and give him the year, the make, and the model, and he'd tell me, well, where on the top of that engine to look? You look behind this thing, and there's these three things. One of them sticking up, well, you measure right there. That is incredible, and a part of that comes down to that faculty and that ability. I was able to do it because, again, Wayne uses his cell phone very effectively for that link. And so I had an assistant in my pocket the whole time when I was being his assistant. So that's another feature of that whole process that has to be in place, is how do you do that with, even though I was capable in electronics, I wasn't capable in automotive electronics. I got better.
So as you can see, there are a lot of pros and there are some cons. Of course, we know the concept is good, but we do also know the devil is in the detail and the time to develop programs. But I do personally, just from my own personal opinion, not necessarily OCHI's, that I think it is a good thing for students in that, thinking back many, many years ago when I was a student, the thought that I could maybe take a course that was shared that when I was out of sync with my program and maybe from a different faculty to have a new perspective or just an expanded perspective or just to do something differently, that would have been pretty exciting. But we do know there would be challenges. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for audience questions. We have about 10 minutes for questions, and we will go ahead and in the back.
So first of all, I just want to mention that Great Falls College has done undergraduate course sharing before successfully, so booyah for us, but also good resources there for hammering out some of those devilish details. And if I understand correctly, when course sharing was on the table for RevUp a couple years ago, campuses from admissions and records had some concerns with witchy ice, and that led them to create a homegrown model for course sharing. That has already been approved by the Board of Regents. So I guess the questions that I'm hearing from admissions and records angle is, what are the issues with that model that is homegrown that is making us look at witchy ice again? How does witchy ice solve those problems? And then what has witchy ice done in the past couple of years to fix its own issues that made us decide not to go with the third-party vendor?
Okay. So the model that you're talking about that the registrars got together and did at the beginning of the RevUp project is really effective, again, on this one student at a time basis, but is definitely not scalable. For a RevUp thing, it works perfectly for our program. We will get everything we need out of sharing students by doing these kind of backdoor faxing transcripts and consortium agreements to allow for financial aid. For the project, we'll get what we need out of that. But if we're looking at like system-wide changes that allow for the opportunity to do this on a big scale at some point in time, that model is just not feasible. The amount of time it would take to do that for any significant number of students at each campus is just not feasible. And the concerns with witchy ice that were concerns then are similar concerns now, and it revolves a lot around having enough buy-in. There definitely is a point where witchy ice is maybe not financially feasible if we only have 2 schools wanting to do 2 programs that we'll be sharing. So a lot of what makes that model successful is the more we can offer through it, the better value it becomes, and then you can market it as a bigger, as a statewide thing, and students can take classes in a lot of places, so it starts to become more of a reasonable expectation the more schools you have involved with it.
The model that we're looking at now is really a one-off, and it's between 2 institutions, where if we look at a larger statewide model, it would be, I guess, more similar to the Western Governor's model, where we have a clearinghouse that would have really the housing and all of the logistics behind the scenes for all of the coursework, and each institution would then offer coursework into this clearinghouse, and it could be then taken by any student at any location, as long as, of course, they had the necessary components if it was a lab activity. So I think to be scalable and to be available statewide for all of our students, at least within the 4 campuses that we have some control over, we're really going to have to look at a different model than the one-off, because it would not be feasible for our registers and financial aid folks behind the scenes to do every student's coursework and financial aid. So it has to be scalable, larger. And in doing that, we have to look at some model, such as Witchy Ice or some other clearinghouse that's going to be able to help with the logistics behind the scenes.
You know, one of the assumptions which we all make at this point is that all of our students have the necessary means to do something like pick up and travel. I've got students that can't necessarily get from Rocky Boy to here because they don't have a vehicle that they can count on, or don't have the money to buy gas, literally, for those sorts of things. And so, and not to mention it's Montana. Anytime you add distance in Montana, you add weather. And that adds in all kinds of entertaining sorts of things. And like you said, the devil's in the details. Do we bus them? Do we let them drive themselves? Who pays for the gas? Do we pay for it? Do they pay for it? When they say, I paid my fee, why do I have, and all of those entertaining things. And just trying to get on D2L sometimes from my house when Charter decides, oh, you don't need to actually have phone and service for the next 15 minutes. There can be some infrastructure problems the further away you get from states, not states, further away from larger towns. How have other places conquered that?
I don't think there are any other systems that have quite the logistics that we do in Montana, just because of some of those distance issues. And obviously there are going to probably still be pockets of places where we're not able to serve students for those reasons. And again, when we're talking about students having to drive somewhere for this lab/lecture portion of like the RevUp and the machining courses, that's only a small portion of what we could offer for course sharing. We could definitely get into offering a lot of gen eds. Those lend themselves super well to course sharing. And other opportunities for students where they wouldn't be traveling. The other part of this is if we could get into doing course sharing, then we would be able to work with businesses in a locale and look at doing an apprenticeship model where we could offer the lecture part of courses online through one of our institutions and have students do that hands-on portion as an apprenticeship in a business and get a degree and be able to be paid while they're going to school and doing that training, and work with that employer to give them the time they would need to complete the online coursework. So it opens up so many more opportunities that hopefully we can start to use to hit all of those, as many of those students in those little pockets as we can.
Martha.
Okay. I have a worry that we haven't included the four-year institutions in some of these conversations. I think potentially we have more capacity to deal with the technology issues within the state and within our system than we realize. I think we could use Witchy Ice. It's expensive because they take their cut. And it seems to me we ought to be able to develop our own ways to handle this within the state. And the other piece, a model that you might consider looking at is the material science doctoral program, where we now have institutions on both sides of the divide, 3 campuses all partnering and delivering a program, and seem to have worked out many of the details of how that happens. So I think there's some other things that we could look at as well to help make things work within the system. I think Jerry might want to comment on technology that we might have, could have, do have, that could help some of this work too.
I agree we should be including the 4 years. I think we probably haven't just because the TAC grant's been so focused on 2-year, but I know there's really good resources there. Just in the spirit of Mary Mo, I'll do a little history. There was talk when I was at the commissioner's office, and I wasn't that directly involved, but it was back like 2007, 2008, about a community college of Montana where OCHI would serve as sort of a clearinghouse for all the programs that would be available online. We would kind of do our own. And back then, I think the technology was what scuttled that, and I don't remember all the details, but different instances of banner rings in my mind. And we may have advanced to a point now, that's a long time ago, technology's changed a lot, where we could do our own. I don't know. That would be a big project, I think. Witchy Ice is appealing because they can take care of all that back office stuff and bring it to scale, but like you said, they take their cut, and that cut probably gets passed on to students. So I think that's worth a discussion.
I might also just throw in there, I definitely think we should be working more with the four-year schools for a long-term strategy. And part of, I think, what Witchy might offer is, because we have funds in the RevUp grant to pilot that, if we were to, say, pay for Witchy while the grant's going on and take a look at what that model might look like, then maybe we could get some momentum behind, hey, as a state, do we want to take the time and put in the effort to do our own system and not pay Witchy to do this? But I think it would lend a lot of meat behind the argument that this could work and could be very efficient for our students and for our system.
Some great thoughts, and I do think that that we do need to explore some more. Perhaps this next part, I'm going to wind it down, would be to discuss that in your small groups, and I know you have some small group breakout sessions, and I'll be eager to hear what you all come up with. But I'll pause now and thank the panel for their hard work and thoughts they've put into this, and let's give them a round of applause.